What's up, everybody? This is Super Mike 2164. Sorry that I'm late, but we're just gonna ask a couple of questions. We're gonna get right to it. Just want everybody to relax and just think. This is all it is. We're gonna be thinking about what they tell us in science, genetic. These scientists. It just kills me. A lot of these white, especially the white supremacist type, evolutionary religious type of scientists guys, these guys act like they can't be wrong. And when you really start analyzing and going through the claims that they make, I mean, they contradict themselves so much. um, we that just tells you that we get to put forth our perception as well, because basically they try to go upon whatever information that they deem is legitimate information. That's what they do. They exclude some information and they keep some information. And that's kind of what they do with science in general. They don't just take all factual information that does exist and then use it to try to, analyze conclusions or come up with, because the truth has to include all reality. All aspects of the reality. The truth can't really contradict reality. Otherwise, either you don't understand what the facts are telling you, or you're wrong, in some other way. That's just a characteristic of the truth, and that's how we come to conclusions and stuff. So I just want to go through some of this here, just questions as I'm going through studying this DNA stuff. Hold on. And when I do this, I'm actually going to show a couple things in science that are real, that they can't explain according to I just want to show something here. Just a couple of scientific anomalies that, aren't really shown. Make sure you press the thumbs up button. So right here we have the Guadalupe woman, 28 million year old human skeleton. Yeah, it maybe somebody got something wrong, but according to what they teach us about how to tell time, what they teach us on how to tell time, with the historical record, paleontology. They say very little is known about this archaeological find, and even the British archaeologists in whose homeland this artifact is still stored almost do not know anything about it. All right. This is something that, they found about, I think it was like 150 years ago, before Darwin. Okay. Or at least it was stored earlier in the British Museum, because there has been no news about the find for many years. And moreover, there are only two well-known photographs of this find, one black and white and was made somewhere excuse me and was made somewhere in the early 20th century. The other is of better quality and apparently was taken in the middle or the end of the 20th century. All right. In 1810, the English fleet captured the Caribbean island of Guadeloupe, owned by France. In 1810, okay? And among the many local trophies captured by the British and taken to England, there was a limestone slab with a skeleton of a woman without a head and hands embedded in it. They know that's a woman because this is a real find, guys. This is not something that is pseudoscience. This is something that's real. But the bottom line is, so this happened in 1810. This is before Darwinism, before Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. Okay. Among many local trophies they found it embedded in it. It was a perfectly normal skeleton of a modern type and was discovered in a layer of limestone 1.6 kilometers long on the northeastern coast of the island. So this is the island of Guadeloupe. Before the British invasion, many skeletons of ancient animals and only one human skeleton were found in this place by the French. And the modern dating of this layer gives 28 million years. That is, this layer was formed 25 million years before the appearance of man as such, according to what we are told. You see, and this is the problem with a lot of this science here. This is a contradiction in their system of science. But instead of, they hide things just to keep them, to keep things, nice and neat so it's believable. A plate with a skeleton was brought to the British Museum 1812. The scientist Carl Cohen, who examined the skeleton 2 years later, immediately ran into dating problems, confirming that it was a modern type skeleton, but honestly admitting that he did not know how old it was. In those years, the study of the remains of ancient people was just beginning. For example, the first bones of the so-called Neanderthal man were found only in 1857. The only reason why I say so-called Neanderthal man, because if you can mate with another human, that's a human being. Those humans, those were people. Because they obviously, if people have, and we'll find that according to mainstream science, most people that's outside of Africa, according to what they're saying, have Neanderthal DNA. And how do they determine that this DNA belongs to the Neanderthal versus normal human DNA? Then you got to understand, okay, if the Neanderthal and the human could mate with each other, that means they had to have the same chromosome number, so they were people. And obviously, people seen them as something that was worthy of having a family with. So the way they draw the Neanderthal, we got to be careful. Okay. Therefore, the ancient skeleton, even with obscure data, caused a lot of interest and became a permanent part of the museum's collection of natural history. Towards the end of the 19th century, the skeleton began to attract special attention of creationists, supporters of divine theory of the origin of the world and man. According to them, undoubtedly, a very ancient and yet completely modern human skeleton pointed to the correctness of their belief and belonged to a woman who lived before the flood. Okay? However, Soon, a strange skeleton was removed from the museum shelf to the basement, where it still should be, under the number PAHR 4128 until 2006. Mention of this skeleton could even be found in the official website of the British Museum, but then it was removed. Now you got to realize these people are removing things. Okay. Instead of saying something's wrong here, figuring out what's wrong. This is what we think. Yeah, it's out of place, but I guess we'll figure out what's wrong later. This is what we think. According to skeptics, the skeleton is a maximum from the 15th century AD, and it accidentally fell into the layer of limestone. This is the explanation. Accidentally fell into the layer of limestone, possibly during an earthquake, when a crack occurred. As evidence, they point out that near the rock with limestone, there was an old cemetery, as well as the fact that along with the skeleton, traces of sand were found in a block of limestone, as reported by Carl Koenig. Now, maybe that's true. Maybe it was just a skeleton in a cemetery and it fell into this limestone, and from the 15th century, from 1400 to about 400 years, it simply got, why don't they just say that? Why do they hide it? Where is it then? Maybe it just, maybe it just formed in there like that. All right, so that's one scientific weird thing. Let's look at something else here. Now, this is something else found in America. There's a lot of this stuff. 400 million year old hammer explained. Okay, hold on. Let's try this. Let's try this one. So this is what they found. The London Hammer, Texas time travel, or simply scientific explanation. So here it is in Texas. A man found this hammer. It was in 400 million year old rock. The dating techniques, according to what they told us, it was 400 million years old inside this rock. But this hammer had been it had been formed in there. The rock had petrified the hammer itself. When you petrify something, the old atoms and element and the atoms and molecules inside of the hammer and the wood actually begin to exchange themselves with the actual rock. So this stuff that had to be in there that long, and this rock had to naturally form around it. This is real. This was found. So let's see, what do they do? How do they explain that? At least they can't hide this one. Are you aware of the London Hammer found in London, Texas in 1938 by Max Hahn and his wife while they were out walking? The hammer also became known as the London artifact when the rock in which the tools was found trapped in was alleged to be over 400 million years old. The question was then posed as to how a tool obviously made or at least used by man could be found in a rock dated so old when mainstream history maintains that man himself has only been known to exist for about 200,000 years. The details boggled conventional history. So they were really confused by this. Believed to be made to work with soft metals due to its shape and size. The hammer has not rusted since its discovery in 1936. It has not rusted. Also, parts of the wooden handle were beginning to form into coal. Dude, this was old. Parts of the wooden handle were beginning to form into coal. Thought to be a tool which is similar to those used in the late 1800s, there was still the wonder around how it could be stuck in such an ancient piece of stone. One belief is that the ancient concretion could have been formed around the tool by soluble minerals. The hammer certainly presents some interesting optics. Okay. The mystery of the time-traveling hammer. So we're not going through all that, but the point is the concepts of this process doesn't make the tool as old as the rock, which therefore debunks any theory that the tool is proof of man's existence well in advance of current belief. Okay, so they debunk it, but it's interesting. Now, there's other stuff. I mean, I'm just going through a couple of these just to kind of let people know that there's a lot of stuff going on that they don't talk about. I mean, these guys, they will hide information. They will hide history, and they won't talk about it. There's a lot of stuff going on. I think it's one other thing here that I want to kind of point to. Let's see here. Let me see. I think there's something here that I wanted to, if I can remember what it is. I gotta find it now. Well, I think it's, what is it? Shoot, I can't remember it. Anyway, well, there's some orbs. Okay, let's see if I can do it this way. I think I can, maybe it'll pull it up here. Yeah. Think of these things. They find there's some old artifacts that they have. I don't know if they're going to show it. I just want to make sure this is what I'm looking for here. But anyway, the point is, the scientists, the scientific community of the Western world, they're not really that honest. I mean, they will have a overarching idea and a theory. And if they find anything that severely contradicts what their preconceived notion is, even as a scientific community, they'll hide it. Yeah, they'll hide it. They won't. It's not going to automatically just come out like that because they don't. They don't have a problem with hiding stuff. For example, so I wanted to go through this part. Let's go through this here. And like I said, this is just science, and this is just some subjects and stuff that I'm coming up with just to get us to think about. Here's a scientific special called, I believe, Journey of Man. Hold on a second.
Merely wiped them from the face of the earth. It's a journey that both terrifies and exhilarates me. First stop, the place where it all began, the birthplace of every human being alive, Africa. Our genetic time machine has revealed a small surviving tribe, the direct descendants of our earliest ancestors. Unlike the rest of us, they stayed on here, and I'm hoping I can learn from them why some of their family left to start the greatest journey in history.
All right, so the point is, this guy said all of mankind, or man, the birthplace is in Africa. This is the geneticist. This is a mainstream belief, but they speak of it as if it's just
Corners of the
absolute fact.
globe. But how could they have made such a journey so suddenly, so swiftly, and so successfully? That's what I'm off to.
All right, so there's another part in here I wanted to check out too. I may not be able to find it because I didn't write down the spot. But this guy, this is a lot of belief. But here in this geneticist, hold on.
50,000 years ago, our ancestors.
Here it is.
Europe, and the axis, the x-axis at the bottom, is the amount of sequencing that was actually done. So about 1 billion DNA sequences were generated typically for each of the.
Hold on.
This computational discovery of
Related, you can actually reconstruct.
So this man here, these people, now this guy is going to basically admit that all humans don't come from Africa. And it's kind of a hard part to get to, but let's see.
That I thought that we were going to invest in when we started our ancient DNA laboratory here was to take a trick from medical genomics. And in medical genomics, the approach that many people were beginning to use was to isolate the part of the DNA that was most interesting for analysis. So in medical genomics, you want to study often all the genes in the genome, which is only 2% of the genome. So what you do is you wash your DNA sample over a series of artificially printed out bait sequences, so 50 DNA letter long ACTs and Gs.
So what he's saying right now, this is how they get the DNA. This is how they tell what's human and what's not human and what's Neanderthal or what have you. So what they do is they have these, DNA is sequenced already and it automatically forms up according to the base proteins, and we went over that in the last section. What the base proteins are, cytosine, guanine, thymine, adenine, and so they have the base sequences. They wash this stuff over these base sequences, and then it kind of forms up human DNA. Because the DNA molecules in our body, there's so much of it, they can't find. They basically find whatever they want to find, and it doesn't really tell them. It's too expensive for them to really isolate everything and really go over it because it's a lot of ancient DNA, and they can't really do it. So what I just wanted us to kind of just get into some of this stuff, just to listen to how they come up with some of this stuff and tell us what they want it to be, and how they, the guesses that they come up with, they change their story. And we're still arguing about who is who. These people can't tell what your genetic lineages are. And, for example, if you look at, they have a thing called Denisovians. They only find teeth in a finger and a little toe. They never found an entire skeleton of it. But then they say that the folks down there in Andaman Islands and all of the Australians, the Aborigines, the Melanesians, the folks down there in the Pacific Islanders, those black people, they say they have all of the Denisovian DNA, but then they say the Denisovian is closer to the Neanderthal, but it's only found in one cave way up in Siberia. They've never found a complete Denisovian skeleton, but they're saying people were, modern humans were having sex with Denisovans and then having sex with Neanderthals, and those are millions and millions of years old, but those weren't humans. And you got to be real careful with white people because they'll start telling you who's not human, who is human, just to fit their narrative. They just give things a different name, but you know, obviously these were people. These were just ancient people, millions of years old. People were a lot older than what these folks want to have. What these people are saying, they're trying to just backtrack their specific lineage. They can't tell us who the original people are. And the only reason why I want to make sure that's important, this is very important, is because we were all over this planet. And you can't mate with something unless it shares your same chromosome. So they had to have very, very, very close lineages. So, you know, that's what we just need to understand. You know, that means that everybody wasn't in the place currently called Africa. Everybody wasn't there. We've been all over this planet, back to Africa, back, you know, to Australia. There's parts always all the way under the ocean. You know, we have multiple ice ages. You know, Antarctica was exposed, and you know, Arctic Circle was exposed. People moved around. You know, different parts of this planet. We have, you know, we can't just go by, and you can't go. Another problem with the DNA scientists, they assume human beings are just kind of like mindless apes, just like a chimpanzee or something. You can't predict human beings like that. They don't, you know, this is stuff that they are guessing at, and they're going in with these preconceived ideas. And I just haven't seen anybody who can explain how they know this stuff, because they keep changing their story. Like even in here, he talks about how, let me see if they even say. Yeah, he talks about how these folks thought he had to get out of Africa.
Found mixing of very, very different populations, and that no one population is or really even could be pure in any sense. So I'm going to begin by talking about the disruptive power of ancient DNA. So my lineage sort of intellectually is as a grandchild and academic to who and create a tree of human relationships. So in this way, in 1978 initially, and then in this analysis updated to 1993, he drew maps of how, he and his colleagues drew maps of how people are related to each other around the world. And what this is a principal component analysis updated to 1993 and redrawn.
I just want you to know who's telling you your story. They don't know, but they do have a lot of truth. They have a lot of information, but you got to realize that these people are willing to hide information that does not fit a preconceived notion or overall notion, because they can't get funding if their story doesn't kind of fall in line with the overall evolutionary, you know, situation or mindset. You know, the thing is, when people say that the folks in Africa didn't have boats and all these kind of things, that can't be true, because they're all over the planet already. But also, that's a kind of slick way of saying that the folks who stayed in Africa are dumb. That's kind of what they're saying.
On in the book that I just published, which looks at about 100 places after 9,000 years ago.
So I'm gonna go.
And so his belief was that the gradient of variation was driven by the
All right, so here's his belief.
After 9,000 years ago. And so his belief was that the gradient of variation was driven by the archaeologically documented spread of farming, and that gradient shown here is in some way related to the proportion of ancestry from first farmers who then diluted that ancestry as they spread and mixed with local.
All right, so he's telling you a preconceived notion that his mentor had. This is the guy who was the authority, the scientist, back in the 60s, Luca Cavalli. Okay? Failed bet. But he was wrong. But he was telling everybody what he thought at that time, and he thought he was the big top scientist and everybody believed it. But now they're going to change the story here. So let's see what they're changing it to.
Who then diluted that ancestry as they spread and mixed with local indigenous European hunter-gatherers. But that turns out to be wrong. The truth is more like this. And so it's that, in fact...
Now, hold on. Keep in mind, look at where we're centering. This is your scientists. They're really just concerned about white lineage. So black people, I just want us to understand, when white folks are telling you the history of DNA and stuff like that, the reason why they use the reference model of a white guy born in 1989, I believe, is because that's all they're concerned about. They're just trying to find their lineage. And, the thing that they call a Neanderthal, the thing that they call a Denisovian, that's they get part of that. They feel like they got part of that. But, that's because those people are dead. Those people are dead. So let's keep going.
In fact, the gradient of hunter-gatherer, of farmer ancestry is almost perpendicular to the one that he drew. And the reason is because people moved too much and more than was expected. It's not the case that the movement of farmers into Europe was the last major movement of people. In fact, there was another mass migration into Europe that occurred after 9,000 or 8,000 years ago. In fact, occurred more between 5,000 and 4,000 years ago. And
all right, right there, another mass migration that occurred to Europe between 5,000 and 4,000 years ago. And that was the real white people. That's when they came from the east, from Anatolia, the Black Sea, and then they migrated and they were driven. This particular group, these folks with the recessive traits, all of these different recessive traits. You got to realize the way they teach us to just focus on the Y chromosome or the little part of DNA that's in the mitochondria, that doesn't tell you how the people looked. That does not tell you really how they looked. It only tells you what those particular genes did. Those particular genes are not dominant or recessive. Those particular genes are masculine and feminine. That's all. Dominant and recessive traits, the tracking of that, which really kind of give you the type of the way the people actually looked, that's done in the nuclear DNA. That's done along the other chromosomes on the certain the gene mapping. And they really don't tell us that. So that's just a question I have if we want to understand some of that, gene mapping.
Utterly transformed the ancestry of that subcontinent. And I'm going to tell you that in a little later, what the evidence for that is. So now I'm going to introduce this technology by talking about ancient DNA, which is a powerful new science.
So they got an ancient DNA. They should be able to go deeper into the DNA than they previously were able to do. So let's try to, I want to get to this one part.
Been analyzed before, that and cleansing with bleach and positive air pressure are used a little bit more than that, and made it possible to literally reduce the amount of sequencing by about 1 million-fold since about 20 years ago. So
this is how they get the DNA out of the ancient bones. So what they do is they take the ancient sample, they break it, they bust it up, they drill a piece of it out, they turn it to powder. They purify it. They get all the microbial DNA out of it. That's how they, according to whatever process they made up to do that. We don't know if some of that microbial DNA, they made a mistake and got rid of some actual real good DNA, but whatever they came up with, that's what it is. And, that's what they did.
So with this pipeline, we can generate data. So what I did in 2013 was I wanted to focus on trying to study large numbers of ancient human skeletal samples, mostly within the last 10,000 years. And I got my training in ancient DNA from Svante Pääbo in largest possible study that one could conceivably do almost with this brute force technology of sequencing DNA from ancient skeletal remains and just brute force sequencing it in the sequencer. The problem is that when you extract DNA from an ancient remain, most of it is not human. So even though the sequencing is relatively inexpensive, even though the technology is advanced to the point that we can regularly successfully get DNA from ancient skeletal remains, most of the material, often 95% of it or 99% of it, is microbial from the bacteria, and it would be hard to scale it much higher. Put in a liquid, and you can take your DNA sample and wash it over these baits, and only be sequencing the parts of the DNA that were useful for us, our studies of history, and that would be another major enrichment.
See, so they only sequence the parts of the DNA that are useful for their studies. So they already know what they're looking for, and they go ahead and find what they're looking for as far as the fit whatever, question that they already have.
So this resulted in 10 to 100 times less data sets, and I'm going to tell you 4 examples of that now. Okay, so I'm going to begin a little, and one of which you get from your father. You get one of each chromosome from each. And here is a blow-up of a little section where you could see the double helix of DNA, which is comprised of these 4 DNA letters, A genome, where there are not very many differences. That tells you that in that place of the genome, your mother and father are quite closely related, because there hasn't been a lot of time for the random miscopying of. Okay, so how do you use this data to learn about the past? Well, one important thing to realize is that you're actually not one person. You contain within you a multitude of individuals. That's the process called recombination. So these 47 chunks, thinking getting homeopathically diluted, only one flip of a coin to measure the probability of being heads, but in fact you're 10 or 100,000 flips of a coin, and you can obtain exquisite measurements of how closely related two people are to each other. And that's the power of the genome, and that's why it's so much more powerful than what you've probably heard about for several decades. Looking at each of these problems, we're wrong, and that's what we see again and again with DNA analysis.
All right, so
the first lesson in humility is that our ancestry of all people in the world is not all traced back to sub-Saharan Africa 100.
All right, so that's where I wanted to get to. So now they're admitting here that our ancestry, this is what white people did. So on the other video, so I wanted to really get that to everybody. So in this video,
experienced a quantum leap in thinking.
Now black people are all over the planet right now arguing because the white people told them that everybody was from Africa.
To do that, I've got to walk in the footsteps of our ancestors, to face hardships, to feel the elements that so nearly wiped them from the face of the earth. It's a journey that both terrifies and exhilarates me. First stop, the place where it all began, the birthplace of every human being alive, Africa.
So right there, the white man said the birthplace of every human being alive was Africa. And then the white man turns around and says,
of these problems were wrong, and that's what we see again and again with DNA analysis. So the first lesson in humility is that our ancestry of all people in the world is not all traced back to sub-Saharan Africa 100,000 years ago. So in the 80s and 70s and 80s and 90s, it became increasingly clear that the great majority of human ancestry comes out of Africa 50 to 100,000 years ago, and we still believe that. So there were archaic humans outside of Africa.
Believe that. I mean, this is what they're saying. And this is the reason why we can't go over this. They're just making estimates and, theories just like anybody else. But the thing is, the difference is, because they've trained our people to just believe them without question, if they make a theory, we argue over it as if it's the gospel truth.
For the last 2 million years almost. But anatomically modern humans, people whose skeletons look like ours, with globular brain cases like this Cro-Magnon individual from Europe, have been longest in the African.
So Cro-Magnon, that's a human looking head, but they say that's not a human, huh?
Skeletal record going back to 200 to 300,000 years. So it was thought, based on DNA analysis of present-day people, including in my PhD work in the late 1990s, and by Luca Cavalli-Sforza and many others, that all lineages trace back to Africa, that non-African diversity is just a small sample of African diversity because it's an out-of-Africa population. However, Neanderthals, which are archaic humans who were discovered in the mid-19th century in parts of Europe and who had brains as big as ours and made tools as sophisticated as our own ancestors.
So they made tools as sophisticated. They were people. Anyway, I just wanted to show that part. There's a lot other to this particular video, but this is the gene flow, and I'll put this particular video in the post up. And, I just wanted to bring forth a couple of questions. This here, I want to also play Dr. Clyde Winters because, the Black people, we got to start actually listening to Black scientists, because the way when white folks don't have somebody to check them, and they do systematically exclude our people from some of the scientific circles because they know that we're not going to let certain things go, certain lies that they like to tell pass. And I just want to show this, Dr. Clyde Winters, and then I'll be out of here in a few minutes. Like I said, I know some of these scientific subjects, a lot of people are not interested in them, but these are just questions from me. And I think they are interesting and, something that we have to start kind of getting into. Let's see if I can share this for you guys. Whoa. All right, so this is Philip Schock's show. I'm not going to show his show, but I'll leave him in the subscription. Dr. Clyde Winters also has a PDF that you should look at, but this is how that's going to be. And I'm going to stop sharing it. I just want you guys to listen to what Dr. Clyde Winters says about this science here.
That intel, we need that intellect. This is what we do.
Maybe I'm not coming through correctly, so hold on a second. Thought that I had something.
Psychologists, sociologists, educational leaders, they're mainly all white women.
Aboriginal people and Melanesians ethnically the same. So let's go full screen on that. Go ahead, Doc, whenever you're ready. I'm gonna mute my mic.
Okay. Well, it's very interesting that, for the past 100 years, research admitted that Africans, Dravidians, Melanesians, and Australians were all Negroes. Okay, they admitted that at first. But see, what happened is that when they began to go into genetic research, the racists, the white supremacists, they wanted to try to separate, black people, because see, remember, it's very few white people in the world, and so when they were saying that the Africans, Dravidians, Melanesians, and Australians were Negroes or from the Negro race, this caused a problem. So what the geneticists did is that they tried to begin to say that, well, the Australians have different genetic structure than the Dravidians, and the Dravidians and the Melanesians, they have a different structure from the West, from the sub-Saharan Africans. And see, they did this thing because, remember, the white supremacists have been able to rule the world based upon the whole idea of divide and rule. See, and so then the white supremacists, whenever you study physical anthropology, whenever they found a skeleton, whenever they found a crane and a skull, the skull always posited when it was an ancient skull, it was a skull of a black person. Some of the most ancient skeletons are of women, and these women, like Naia and others, they always are black women, because see, you can always look at a skull, and if you look around the nasal features and
All right, so this is what I'm gonna do. So basically, I want to end it. That was Dr. Clyde Winters. I'm going to end it because I don't want to go too long. But the thing is, like, this is the Maquia people. If you look in the way that the white people describe the L3 haplogroup, and this is where they start confusing people, because they say that these Maquia people in Madagascar, they say that the Australians, they say that the Tasmanians, they say that the Melanesians, South Pacific Island people, they're not African. They're not black. But we look right at them. And then they'll argue with you that your eyes don't see what you see. They'll tell you that phenotype has nothing to do with genetic structure, which is extremely insane, because you can't get a phenotype unless you have the genotype to code for that phenotype. You can't get the phenotype is the way you actually look, is a physical feature. The genotype is what is in your DNA. As the white man did say, which is true, we have many, many, many different people in our DNA. We could have looked all sorts of different ways based what we got carrying us, what we have inside of us, our genetic structure. But the way that we look at any given moment is our phenotypes. Okay, if you see similar phenotypes, it's because there's something there in the genes that, especially if you see similar phenotypes from from groups of people, they are related. You're looking right at the genes, you see. So the thing is, and I showed some in the last little clip of the questions that I have for these guys. And like I said, a lot of this stuff is coming from, let me do this. This evolutionary idea, this is Darwinism stuff. I mean, all of us have been taught it. There's some truth in it because evolution is true. We do change based on conditions. We change. But everything that they always add a little lie in there. So this is The Origin of Species by Darwin. But with regard to the material world, we can at least go as far as this. We can perceive the events are brought about not by insulated interpositions of divine power. You see, their science is there to get you from believing in divinity, the divinity of existence, the divinity of the human being. All of this is they don't want that. They don't want you to even believe in that. Now, the way these people want divinity to be as if it's magic. No, that's not true divinity. But the way that they would like to present it, they would like to present it in a way that it's a fairy tale so that it's not scientific. No, it is scientific because there is a motivation to life. And we can look at that itself as sacred to survive, So this man said the origin of species by means of natural selection or the preservation of favored. Now, who decides favor? Favored races in the struggle for life. So this is where, when you're talking about racism, this is science. This is evolutionary biology. If something doesn't fit evolution, it's not going to be funded. So you're going to get a skewed, you're going to get a skewed perception. And that's what Darwin does. That's his cousin, Francis Galton, the father of eugenics. That's what we're dealing with here.
And people began to look, and they found more and more of these Clovis points, but nothing earlier than.
So this right here is the final thing that I'm going to end it off on here. And this is just showing how we have to rethink, about the peopling of America, or what's called America. They want to have this stupid African, philosophy so bad that it's just some obvious things. Obviously that African people, black people, with the wide DNA of Albert Perry, 364,000 years at least that they're estimating by their techniques of estimation and divergence. These are techniques that they're using themselves, and they're saying it's ancient. But then that puts everybody back to what they call Denisovian, which were just people, because these people were able to. They were if some, like, you can't, an eagle can't have a baby with a duck because they have two different chromosome numbers. They may be both birds, but they can't have babies because the chromosome numbers are different. I think the eagle has like 44 and the duck has like 11 or 12 or something. You can't mix a rabbit with a cat. Humans and chimpanzees can't have babies because you have two different chromosome numbers. They won't line up. The eggs won't form a body. Okay, they have to insert genes forcibly in order to try to, mix different species. So they can do it that way, but you can't just naturally do it. So this is why, we have to be very careful. We have to look at how they're telling us, especially this is what makes me think when they start telling us about who is the African American. That's when my, I'm getting real critical about whatever they're saying. As you're going to tell me about me, I'm going to study everything that you say, and we're going to verify it with what we know. So this is the peopling of North America. He's just going to talk about Clovis, and we'll go through more of this because, Ivan Van Sertima, they came before Columbus, has touched on this. We got Dr. Clyde Winters, who we just heard from. He's touched on some of this. But I know a lot of black people, because we're trained to listen to white faces, I'll try to let white people, just to show them contradicting themselves, or just to show them affirming what we've been knew. Black folks, we already knew this stuff, but, too many of us have to wait until white people admit that they was wrong.
And so people then changed from what Hurlichka was thinking. And by the way, he died a bitter old man holding to his thesis, and he was the only person left when he died who still believed in 4000 BC. And you pity him. But anyway, they moved on to the point that Clovis, named for the town where these large projectile points were found, became known as the culture that was the first Americans. And the theory that they came over from the Asian coast across from Siberia became known as the Clovis first theory. Right? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. These are the typical Clovis points. The one on the left is from Clovis, New Mexico at Blackwater Draw. The other two are two of the 3 points that were found at Dent, Colorado a few years later. And I'll show you those here. This is what Blackwater Draw looks like. It's not the most romantic place in the world, but very neat archaeologically. A lot of extinct mammals have been found in association with these Clovis points and the various tools. This is the Dent site. It was excavated in the early 1930s by Father Bildry of Regis College, who recognized the importance of it, had no archaeological training, but led his crew out there. I love the early photograph of note. All these guys are in the field with ties. Very British, aren't they? Yeah, I don't think I have a suit that could stand what I do in the field. But at any rate, you can see there they are excavating one of the mammoths, and you can see one of the points down there in place next to one of its bones. All right. Alongside these Clovis points, all across the United States, various sites began cropping up that had either different shaped tools, or they began to get radiocarbon dates that were considerably older than Clovis. Now, every time one of these came up, the replacement for Alice Hurlichka, the people who believed diehard that Clovis was indeed the only first culture there was nothing older than them, they would stand up and shoot these down. And unfortunately, with heavy archaeological and scientific scrutiny, many of these sites later turned out to not be as old as they were originally claimed. But more and more have been coming up to the point that they created an entire different set of scientific culture who believed in older than Clovis or pre-Clovis. So you began to have the scientific debate between Clovis first and pre-Clovis.
All right, and so that's what we're dealing with too. We're going to end there. There's pre-Clovis point. Now, what Clovis is basically would point to what is called the red-skinned Native Americans, or the Native Americans that, even though today these Native Americans are a lot lighter than because white folks have mixed with them now, but they were a little more red, so they were like the Indian from India with the straighter hair. And then you had the black Native Americans. And a lot of black people were pre-Clovis. We had sites on the eastern, South Carolina. This is way before Columbus. So we'll get into some of that next time I do one of these, but I'll try to set everything up a little bit better. And, I think I'm going to open it up a little bit later too, just so people can, maybe I can get some, maybe we'll get a little bit of conversation on it. I don't want no debate because I just want questions and actual trying to answer. I want to actually answer questions or come up with some ideas. So that's pretty much it, guys. Peace.